Welcome back to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, where experts discuss and share best practices to manage the convergence of the wired, the tired, and technology. I'm your host, Ira Wolfe. As we have in the past few episodes, we've talked about changing work and purpose and millennials, but really excited today to have as my guest Dr. Liz Alexander. I find this particular soulmate in futurism and future of work and leadership, and we hit it off and waited till after the holidays and decided to do today's podcast. But just a little bit of background about Liz. She is a PhD as an educational psychology in the University of Texas, but most importantly, she's written or co-authored an amazing 20 books, and I can tell you from writing 4 books and co-authoring 1. That's just an amazing feat. But beyond that, she really's got an incredible vision for the future of leadership and work, and it's a shared vision that I have. So I'm really excited about having Liz today. And Liz, welcome.
Well, thank you, Ira. Thank you. And I'm in absolute awe that you can get out, Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization without stumbling over that, as I just did.
Yeah, 7 years of practice.
I love it.
So, but we try to keep these focused, and not that I want to cut into talking about you or me, but I think everybody anybody that's listening to this is ready to figure out a question that you have right at the top of your bio that you sent me is what's next? You and I talk about work, but organizations are changing, business models are changing. Where we thought automation was decades away is now right upon us. So the question is what's next?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially for this topic of leadership, this kind of future of leadership. And before we maybe get into that, it might be worth just defining it, because, even Warren Bennis, I believe, said that decades of academic analysis have given us more than 350 definitions of leadership, but still no clear and unequivocal understanding as to what actually distinguishes leaders from non-leaders, and the ones that are effective from non-effective ones. And I think that's pretty obvious from the way that we're always having to tack on an adjective to the term. You see people talking about authentic leadership or exceptional leadership or visionary leadership. And it was funny, I was on LinkedIn the other month, and somebody had asked, give me one word for leadership. And my goodness, he had over 20,000 people responding. And it was almost as if they dumped out a dictionary, Ira. You hear me? There was just like a whole load of different words, and there was no universal agreement on what we mean by this term leader. So there's a challenge in and of itself. So
what's your one word? Liz?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would go with one word, but my definition, and this is something that really speaks to me as a futurist, and I'm sure will speak to you too, is the definition that Joel Barker has said, which is someone others choose to follow in order to reach a desired future that they would not get to by themselves. And so I think there's some really key points. I mean, it's all very well Peter Drucker saying, simplifying it, leader is someone who has followers, but, you could be following someone over a cliff. What I really like about Joel Barker's definition is it's talking about, where is the only outcome, where is the only place that we really want to be taken to, and that's our desired future.
Again, we're living in just unprecedented time. So while it's a little scary at times, and certainly anxiety levels are high, you also have to look at it that it's an opportunity that no one has had prior to this. So when we talk about, when I'm presented with leadership questions, a lot of it has to do with the millennials. I think that's a narrow focus, but it's an important, because at least in the U.S., there's 80 million of them. But beyond that is talking about how work is going to change in organizations. I'm in the midst of one of many articles, but really talking about even looking at, when we talk about leadership, it's how do you organize, I guess, your followers, or how do you organize a business? And we're sort of trapped in that military hierarchical top-down organizational structure, that organizational chart. And up until maybe 20 years ago, it worked pretty well, and then we had a lot of collapsing of that there were too many layers. But now it seems that the direction to go, or the direction that's working because of the acceleration of change and how fast communication needs to be, is that you have to think about the chart in nodes. It's like a network. It's how we're even communicating right now over the internet. That that the information moves from one node to another, and it looks for the fastest route, but it's not always the same. So, how are you? What do you think? I guess, what's your perspective, or what's your vision for what an organization in the future looks like, and how does that affect work and how things get done?
Yeah, great question. For me, Ira, the biggest issue is the fact that we have conflated leadership with a position or a role. I think we've all experienced that, just because somebody is called a senior executive or in command or heading a department, that doesn't actually make them a leader, to my mind. I like what Joshua Cooper Romo has written in The Age of the Unthinkable. That's a really great book. And he says, the future demands a different resume. And my perspective on this is we need people who think differently. I mean, the problem, I think, with many of the leaders that we're seeing is that they're very much bound up into this outmoded, elitist notion of who should be a leader. Some months ago, I wrote an article for a UK business magazine on the shared characteristics between CEOs and psychopaths. The ruthlessness, the narcissism, the manipulation. And I think so much of it, particularly in the West and very much so here in the US, leadership is bound up with this ability to win and to make huge profits. But what I think we need to look at is not only looking at different outcomes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making huge profits, but if that's the only thing that your leadership is directed at, then it's hardly surprising we're seeing all these, trust is in the gutter. Edelman has just, brought out their trust barometer for this year and showing, trust is just so low everywhere, and the same with employee engagement. So I think it needs to be much more inclusive, and it's very much about how we're all thinking, basically. And I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, and some people have even challenged, in fact, I think Ramo did, or somebody did, challenge President Obama as sort of articulating things that as problems when they're actually dilemmas. And that's what I mean about, the future demands a different resume. It demands a different way in which we're looking at the world, and we can no longer look at it in the way of the, somewhat simplistic, here are some problems. We've got the great man theory. He's going to come swooping in and solve everything, because ultimately most things are certain and predictable. Well, no, we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world of dilemmas. There are no clear-cut solutions or choices. It's that classic example of there's 10 spaces on a lifeboat and you've got 11 passengers on a sinking ship. What do you do? Making the best choice. So I think it's thinkers. That's my perspective. It's going to be the people who think different, to quote Steve Jobs, are the ones that are really going to be the leaders of the future, and it will have little or nothing to do with their position or role within an organization.
Liz, you brought up so many great points there. One of the things, I guess one of the questions I have is, what do you feel are some of the skills, other than thinking differently? How does that, what are some skills that a leader today, requires that might be different in the past. And, certainly we have our competency list and visioning and planning and organizing and managing other people and inspiring people. But we need to go beyond that because, as you mentioned, we're living in what and I know you're familiar with the term, but VUCA. We're living in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And, how do you, what are the skills that someone needs, whether they have the title of leader, whether they're that CEO or president or vice president or director, or whether they're just a contributor, because contributors can be as well. So, what do you think are some of the basic skills that people need to develop?
Yeah, well, if we go back to Joel Barker's definition, if what we're trying to do or what leadership is all about is helping us reach a desired future that we wouldn't get to. One of the things that shocked me, and I think a lot of people during the recent U.S. Political debate, is not one of the candidates ever clarified a desired future. Maybe I missed it, maybe they did. You know what I mean? This is what we want America to be. This is where we want America to go in fairly specific terms, or at least terms that could inspire all of us to want to get behind that.
Yeah, it was sort of by, but it sort of was, and it's still, the rhetoric's still there. We're going to fix the mistakes of the past, and therefore we have a clear path to the future. And
I know, but it's almost like it's like the war on drugs. We're always warring on something, aren't we? You know what I mean? It's always about what we don't want or what we're trying to get rid of, as opposed to articulating, a really inspiring vision. That's what I was hoping for, and I'm sure that that's what a lot of most employees are looking for in business leadership. So, I think there's two parts to your question. One, if you're going to be a leader, what's the thing about what's the vision piece, and have you actually articulated, maybe not in specific ways, but in a general enough way so that people feel, oh, yes, I can see how what I do could contribute that, without it being too prescriptive. And then I think the other thing, too, is getting our heads around the importance of collaboration and partnership. Even with people that we wouldn't normally think of. Look at you and I, as sort of independent consultants, for example. We're not in competition with one another, but, you've got those people who have a very competitive mindset. Oh, I'm not going to be doing this with another futurist because, they're in competition. Well, that's that kind of zero-sum mentality. Whereas, that's the whole new topic around co-opetition, where organizations, really visionary leaders, and saying, look, we cannot deal with this dilemma. We cannot handle this dilemma by ourselves. We are now going to need to reach out industry-wide to people who normally would be seen as our competitors. But because the dilemma is bigger than any one of us and what we're doing in our business, and it's going to benefit the industry and, my goodness, maybe the world, then we need to start collaborating and partnering in different ways. So I think, again, it all goes back to that attitude, that perspective of, the old playbook doesn't work anymore. We have to be much more comfortable with chaos and complexity and, and find people that can help us meet the unexpected and work through those challenges.
Well, I knew you and I thought a lot about, and I know you haven't seen this article, but I can't remember where it's going to be published, but for anyone who goes to the blog or LinkedIn, you'll probably see this pop up. But my title was Rest in Peace Status Quo. You need to rewrite your business playbook. So we haven't even talked about that yet. There's a number of there's so many things that we talked about, and I'm just looking at the time here. We've got about 5 minutes to try to wrap this up. But I recently wrote an article about 6 kind of essential skills that people need, and you hit on most of them. And certainly you need to be curious and collaboration and be creative. But Jeff, Jeff Hoffman, who is a co-founder of Priceline and kind of a serial entrepreneur, hugely successful. I had the opportunity to hear him and meet him just a few months ago at an event, and he shared his secret, and you just touched on it. And he calls it info sponging. Every morning, what he does is in the morning, he gets up, and for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he reads something from, whether it's in a book or listens to the news or something that has nothing to do with anything that he's working on. And our habits are usually to read something that's related to something that we're doing or something that interests us. And he really searches for things in his email that have nothing to do with something immediate. And he always finds some nugget, and those nuggets he pieces together. And eventually you get a picture, and one of those things was how he developed Priceline. But I think some of the other fascinating solutions or innovations, which really are good traits for leadership, was that that there was a fast food business. Now this is probably about 30 or 40 years ago. Fast food business that was really struggling with getting people through fast enough, and they also didn't have enough parking. So he basically looked outside the industry and drove by a bank and saw the drive-through, and envisioned that was one of the solutions, especially when you didn't have enough parking to get in. And so the fast food drive-through, which now is everywhere and many times the only way people ever get their food, came from the banking industry. But the other examples are, Uber didn't come from the taxi industry, and Airbnb didn't come from the hotel industry, and iTunes didn't come from the music industry. In fact, all those industries basically refuted that. So I think what you touched on was that curiosity and collaboration, but also reaching outside your own network, seeing what's happening elsewhere and being able to bring that back in is going to be a real key for leadership. What are some words of wisdom that you would, because I know you talk to lots of people and lots of companies, what's your kind of golden nugget that you can impart before we got to end what we predicted would be our future, that the time would go incredibly fast and we want to be able to cover all the topics?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love what you just said about the Priceline guy, because that's the essence of creativity, isn't it? It's innovations at the intersection of all of these different things. That, when you ask for a nugget, I think what I would like to see, my desired future, is a greater appreciation that we all have a contribution to make, that it's no longer this great man theory, this single hero. I know we love the concept of, the one person saving the world. It's usually Bruce Willis or Kiefer Sutherland. But we have to move aside from that. And I would also like to see, people talk about the future of work. To be honest with you, I'd like us to, again, get rid of that concept of work, because it just sounds so hard, doesn't it? And to talk more about contribution. So I think one of the greatest things that leaders can do as they're inspiring us to reach a desired future that we wouldn't get to by ourselves, is to help to articulate how all of us have a contribution to make at whatever level in an organization. And if leaders can inspire every single person to really believe that and give them the resources in which they can make a meaningful contribution, then I really do think we would see not only a trust in our institutions increasing, but also a boost in employee engagement levels.
Liz, we barely I can't even say we did justice to scratching the surface on this topic. So many people may have some other questions and want to reach out. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yes, well, you can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Liz Alexander, on Twitter at Dr. Liz Alexander, and they're very, very welcome to email me as well. It's Dr. Liz, DRLIZ, at leadingthought.us.com. Don't forget the .us in the middle. Dr. Liz at leadingthought.us.com. I love a good conversation, and this has been an exceptional one. Ira, thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you for taking some time out. I'm sure we'll do this again and have many other discussions offline and online as well. And for all those who are listening to this, I appreciate you joining in at another Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, where we talk about how the wired, the tired, and technology are converging and changing our world. Till next time, have a wonderful day.